Welcome to the Flat Earth from the ground up. In Part 1, we saw that the modern Flat Earth idea has its origins in the fundamentalist Christian rantings of a 19th century quack. In this segment, we'll take a look at the Flat Earth disk itself, the map, and how they compare to the observable world. Let's first talk about the disk of the Flat Earth. Flat Earthers assert that the Flat Earth is a disk about 25,000 miles across, the same diameter as the circumference of the actual globe of the Earth. This gives a surface area on one side nearly 2.5 times as large as the surface area of the entire actual Earth, and that's ignoring the surfaces on the edge and the other side. To have the same mass as the observable Earth, this disk would need to be about 500 miles thick. A cylinder this large would collapse under its own weight into a sphere. There's no way around this. Even if you imagine the flat Earth to only be, say, 10 miles thick, which is just a couple of miles thicker than the deepest part of the oceans, it would still be 1.5 times the mass of the Moon, and would still collapse under its own weight into a sphere. This is why planets are round. This is a showstopper problem with the flat Earth model, and we just got started. But let's pretend for a moment that this hypothetical disk is magical and won't collapse under its own weight. On the globe Earth, the gravity vectors all point toward the center of the globe, and so the down direction is toward the center of the Earth from any point on the planet. The gravity on this non-collapsing flat Earth disk would behave the same way, but the experience would be quite different. The center of mass would be in the middle of the disk, halfway through it. As you traveled from the center to the edge, your gravity vector would point back toward the center at an increasing angle. So you can see why flat earthers also want to discredit the entire idea of gravity, as it badly interferes with their flat Earth. Of course, everyone knows that things fall down, so the flat earthers have come up with two alternate explanations for what is already fully explained by universal gravitation. One being that gravity is actually nothing more than density, and the other being that the whole flat Earth, firmament and all, is constantly being accelerated upward from below. Both of these childish ideas are flawed in a number of ways, but ironically they both require gravity as part of their explanations, and therefore fail completely to discredit the gravity they are trying to explain away. The behavior of gravity in the real world is extremely well understood, physically observable, and experimentally confirmed. There is no scientific controversy concerning its existence. There's no dodge for it, and gravity makes a flat Earth impossible. This is our first invalidation of the flat Earth model. We could stop here. But let's ignore that for now and talk a bit about maps. We have mapped the Earth extremely well. We accurately know the distances and longitude and latitude for every bit of coastline on the planet. This is the familiar globe Earth, and below it various maps of the same Earth. Cartography is a fascinating subject with a long history. To make a map, you must use a map projection. A map projection is a mathematical transformation whereby a point on the globe becomes a corresponding point on the map. There are many map projections in common use. Because it's impossible to portray a curved globe on a flat map perfectly, all maps contain distortion. Every map projection distorts the globe in some way, with each different projection type distorting the globe in different ways. Here's a familiar one, the Mercator projection. You may remember this one from grade school. It was invented in the middle of the 16th century by the Flemish cartographer Gerardus Mercator as an aid to navigation. While it stretches the size of things the further they are from the equator, it preserves compass directions between locations. This Malvada projection is an example of an equal area projection where the relative sizes of the land masses are correct but the distances between them are distorted. This equirectangular equidistant map has no distortion along the equator, but in keeping each of latitude and longitude lines as parallel, distortion occurs towards the poles. The azimuthal equidistant map fans out from a central point. The distance between lines of latitude are equal in this projection, but the distance between longitudinal lines becomes wider and wider toward the outer edge. So, the first thing to remember about map projections is that they all introduce distortion in one way or another, whether that be size, distance, or both. The other thing to remember is that map projections are reversible. You can go from a map back to a globe and back again to a map. The flat earthers, since at least Samuel Robotham, who we profiled in the first segment of this series, have asserted that the azimuthal equidistant map centered around the North Pole is the true layout of the Earth. Robotham justified it this way.
If we now consider the fact that when we travel by land or sea from any part of the known world in a direction towards the North Polar Star, we shall arrive at one and the same point, we are forced to the conclusion that what has hitherto been called the North Polar region is really the centre of the Earth.
It's also a fact that if you travel toward the south from any part of the known world, you will likewise arrive at one and the same point, that being the South Pole, and that would make this map the true layout instead, according to Robotham, but that didn't suit his narrative, so he left that bit out. Now, if you take a look at the version the flat earthers promote, you'll see that anything south of the equator is badly stretched. Both the land masses and the distances are considerably larger than they are on the real Earth. There's a lot more water than there is land in the southern hemisphere, so it's not as glaringly obvious as it would be in a south polar projection, but if you especially note Australia as just one example, you'll see that it's more than twice as wide as the real continent. Here's Flat Earth Australia compared with real Australia. I'm sure it would surprise the Australians to know that they have an extra stretch of land they weren't aware of that's large enough to hold the entire continental United States with room to spare. I was sent this map by a flat earther who assured me that it was the actual true layout of the flat Earth. At a glance, you can see that the size of the southern hemisphere land masses have been reduced to something more like they actually are. They've done a bit of photoshopping to shrink and shift around the continents. This is a deception, however, and it fails completely. By changing the sizes in an azimuthal equidistant projection, you necessarily also change the locations. We can see this clearly by reversing the projection and overlaying the actual coastlines of the real Earth. There's no possible way to tweak an azimuthal equidistant map so that Australia and the others are a different size, yet still span the same degrees of longitude on the map. This is another showstopper for the flat Earth model. But again, let's ignore it and move on. From any point on the flat Earth, south is a different direction. Much worse than that, east and west from any location now point in completely different directions than they do in the real world. For example, in our world, Spain is due east of New York. In the flat Earth world, if you travel due east from New York, you wind up somewhere in Africa. This is yet another showstopper. Now, I said in the last segment we'd come back to Samuel Robotham, and so let's do that. In the first edition of his book, he says that a degree of latitude in the southern hemisphere had never yet been measured. Unsurprisingly, he was wrong. Australia had been surveyed and mapped in great detail twice before he was even born. And if he'd bothered to drop by the British Library, he could have seen the maps at any point in the intervening 50 years. He makes a claim about the measurement that would prove to him that the Earth is a globe.
A degree of longitude in England at the latitude of 50 degrees north is 38.57 nautical or 45 statute miles. At the latitude of Port Jackson in Australia, which is 45 degrees south, a degree of longitude, if the Earth is a globe, should be 42.45 nautical or 49.52 statute miles. In other words, a degree of longitude along the southern part of Australia ought to be, if the Earth is a plane, nearly 20 miles greater than a degree of longitude on the southern coast of England. This is the point which is yet to be settled.
Guess which measurement is accurate? This means, by his own lights, that the Earth is a globe. Robotham found out about this, no doubt, when one of his better educated marks called him out on it. So, did he admit he was wrong? Did he pack it in and find something useful to do with his life? Not a chance. He just cut it out of his script of lies, published a second version of his book without it in, and kept talking as though nothing had happened. This is Samuel Robotham in a nutshell. This confirmed fraud and liar, this God-bothering ignoramus, this unprincipled quack, this sorry excuse for a man, prancing about calling himself a doctor, selling sugar water as medicine to people who didn't know any better. This is the man flat earthers hold up as the pinnacle of their kind, and for once, I agree with them wholeheartedly. Okay, so we've found enough already to completely invalidate the flat earth as any kind of model of reality. But there's still more stupidity yet to be revealed. Thank you for watching. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in part 3, where we'll talk about the sun.